Hey everybody. So it's recently came up that several students are having problems with the step in which you connect the squash and stretch control on our controller to the squash and stretch deformer. So that's actually not something you're doing wrong. Maya has made an update that is causing this to work differently. So if you're using Maya 2020.4, which you can see up here on the top of the screen, then it's going to work differently than it does if you're using a slightly older version of Maya. So we're making this video to kind of show you how to work around that. It will still work, we just have an extra step we have to do. So first let's go ahead and add that deformer in here so we can get to that point. So we'll see that what is happening for most people is if I go to Windows, General Editor, and then Connection Editor, the way it was working before, the way I show you to do it in the video, is you select your squash and stretch modifier here, select squash 1, and hit reload right. And then we should be able to select squash and stretch and factor, and it will connect them together. However, you'll see factor is grayed out now. And that's not true in other versions of the software. If you have 2020.3 or 2020.2, this will still work and you can just connect them together. But since we have 2020.4, we have to connect this differently. So the way we will do it now involves sort of digging behind the scenes of what's going on in the connection editor by opening up a new editor that you're probably less familiar with, and it's called the Node Editor. So if we go to Windows, it's right here under Outliner, Node Editor. And the Node Editor just sort of allows us to see all of the connections. And there's a lot of connections happening behind the scenes that we may not be aware of, right? So if I just select this, this ball for an example, and click this button right here that has the two arrows, this will show us both any input connections and any output connections to the sphere. Right? It shows us that some of the input connections are this squash connector, and some of the output connections have to do with the materials, the shading groups. Right? So we can see that if we expand this, certain values or certain elements within this have these lines that come out of them and going into other nodes, right? So like for example, the output geometry on this is going into the in mesh. And for a lot of this, don't worry about too much about what that even means. But this just means that certain things are controlling other things. And if a line is coming out of one value, that means that value is controlling the value that it's going into, right? And all of this is just a way of making these things apply to certain objects or elements within the scene. So to show you what's happened, what's different now, is if I select my squash and stretch handle and I click this in and out button, just so we can kind of focus in a little bit more, we will see that the thing that is being affected is this sphere, right, the in mesh. And you'll see that that factor that we had there has a line going into it. And that means something else is controlling it now. That's why it's grayed out. And the thing that is controlling it is this squash handle 1 shape. And this actually exists in older versions as well. It's just not controlling the factor in those older versions of Maya. So if we expand this, we'll see that a lot of the attributes are still the same, right? We have a factor in here as well. And this factor in the shape is controlling the factor in the squash 1 deformer, right? And so that's why we can't connect it, is because this factor is already connected to it, right? So what we can do is basically just connect our object into, or our attribute into this factor. So there's a couple of ways we can do that. I'll show you sort of the simplest from what we've already known or already learned is if I just select the squash 1 handle shape and reload that on the right. Now you'll see squash 1 shape and factor, and I can just select that, and now they're connected. And if I select my squash and stretch handle here again and hit reload, now you'll see this looks a little different. Now our control is in there, and our control is directly connected to squash and stretch. Squash and stretch goes into factor. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to undo, just so we can undo that, and show you how to bring in both of those, so we could do that ourselves if we want to connect it in the node editor instead. So what I can do is select the squash and stretch handle and our control, and select that. And so now they're both going to come in here, and you'll see our control right there. That's where we have that squash and stretch attribute. So I'm going to pull that up here, because what I'm looking for is right here, this squash, apparently I have that selected too, this squash one handle shape. And so I could connect it this way as well. I could just drag squash one, or squash and stretch into factor. Really? Let's try it again. Squash one into here, maybe. No. There. Apparently I have to drag it to that dot. So drag it from squash and stretch to this dot on factor, and now it's connected in. And so hopefully this will work now. Let's see if that fixed it. So now that works. So we got a couple of different ways we could do it. Just probably the easiest way for you to remember is just using the node editor right now to select this squash one handle shape, right, and connecting it here in our connection editor that way. Right. Also remember that this is what you'll have to do for the bend deformer as well. So to bring that in instead of the squash one handle shape, you would use the bend deformer shape. So if you have questions, let me know, and hopefully this will help you get through that little hiccup on the project. So thanks, and I'll talk to you all soon. Bye bye.